The original PSVR had some great VR games. I never bought one because I didn't have a PS4, so I couldn't really justify the cost of a console and headset for a few games that I can't play on PC or Quest. Not to mention how dated the tech was with the PSVR1. Single camera, 180 degree tracking, and ancient move controllers put me off. But I thought when the PSVR2 releases, some of these great VR games would get ports over to a new system, maybe with some upgrades. It seems that isn't happening, at least not yet, so I want to make a video highlighting these PSVR1 gems that could end up lost to new VR gamers, stuck on an old dated system and never reaching their full potential on modern hardware. One of the best PSVR games was Blood and Truth. This was a more on-the-rails type shooter where you could move between preset points, sometimes in a set area to change position or just to move forwards through the game. It has sections that you can climb or you pick locks. Visually, it was great for a PSVR1 game with some really lifelike human NPCs with a story. This is a game I really want to play, and I think with the PSVR 2, they could actually do a great remaster with improved visuals as well as open the game up to give the player free locomotion so they can move through the world with a thumbstick. Wipeout Omega Collection was 3 Wipeout games in one, all remastered for the PS4, but later got VR support. From what I heard, very little was lost in terms of visuals for the VR version, and being inside a fully rendered cockpit, flying through these futuristic cities, going down the side of skyscrapers, and making huge jumps would be incredible in VR. I've read some rumours that Wipeout game is being worked on, so hopefully that's true, but getting the Omega Collection on PSVR 2 would be a fairly simple game to port. To a lot of people, the best PSVR1 game was Astro Bot. This cute little robot has quickly started to turn into Sony's mascot, with the PS5 coming in with a pack-in Astro Bot platformer for non-VR. This game shows off the new controllers, and Astro Bot now has brand recognition with non-VR gamers, so it would be an excellent game to port over to PSVR 2 and sell some more headsets. One of the issues with this game would be the fact that it uses the tracked PS4 controller, including the trackpad. I don't think they could get around this. We've seen games like Moss, which were DualShock only on PSVR, then they were later released on PC and Quest, using the motion controls as a gamepad and allowing you to reach into the world with one hand to manipulate things. Either way, I'd really love to see Astro Bot get a PSVR 2 game, whether it's porting the existing game or releasing a sequel. Resident Evil 7 has a VR mode for PSVR 1. This is a gamepad only, and it is actually possible to play Resident Evil 7 on PC with the mod, and this includes full motion controls. The only official port though is locked on PSVR 1, and it would be great after Resident Evil 4 gets a VR port for them to give Resident Evil 7 the same VR treatment as Resident Evil 8 on PSVR 2. Will it happen? Probably not. A game that we definitely won't see a PSVR port of is Driveclub. This racing game was incredibly visually, and it still has some of the best rain effects. It also got a PSVR1 mode, but unfortunately this was really blurry due to the power of the PS4. Sony shut down the studio that made this game, and online no longer works, so it's never going to happen, but I feel that Driveclub would be an excellent game to get a PSVR 2 update on the PS5, because it's more of an arcade focused game, so it would appeal to more people who want something less serious compared to Gran Turismo 7. Ironman VR was a PSVR1 exclusive for a while. This game has excellent movement, with you using thrusters in your hands to fly. So you put your hands down by your sides, and then angle your wrists to fly forwards, then you put your hands in front of you to slow down or fly backwards. You also fire out of the palms of your hands. I haven't played it, but I've read that the movement was one of the best things about the game. Visually, it was a bit dated though, and a remaster on PSVR 2 would really open up the game, but Meta bought the developer of the game, and later it got a Quest port, so I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see a PSVR 2 version at this point. Here They Lie is an early PSVR 1 horror game set in a surreal world. The art style on this looks great, and the world and atmosphere really lends itself to being in the game with VR. I've heard that it's very blurry on the PSVR 1, and it would be really fantastic to see this get a PSVR 2 release with higher resolution and good quality motion control support. I looked up the developer, Tangent Games, and Here They Lie is the only game that they've made, and the social media accounts no longer exist, so this is another game that will be forever lost to the PSVR 1 platform, unfortunately. VR Worlds was a kind of demo for the PSVR 1, which personally I think should have been free. This featured 5 minigames showing off different aspects of VR. These were the London Heist, which featured an interactive cutscene talking to a mobster, and a section in a moving car shooting. This later turned into a full game, Blood and Truth, which I already talked about. Ocean Descent is a short demo experience where you're in a shark cage, and you get lowered into the ocean with some jellyfish, and later get attacked by a shark. Scavenger's Odyssey was a shooter based in space, where you're strapped into a mech-like vehicle and you can teleport jump onto walls. Some people struggled with the movement on this one, but it was another short demo which a lot of people enjoyed. VR Luge required you to lay on the ground as you're going down a steep hill with cars and lorries to avoid or go under. It was controlled by your head movements. And lastly, you had Danger Ball, which is effectively 3D Pong. I don't think they should just port VR Wheels to the PSVR 2, but I'm surprised that we don't have some sort of pack-in for the PSVR 2 that showcases VR to new people with some minigames like this and make great use of the haptics and eye tracking of the new headset and controllers. They had a full game for the PS5 with the Astro Bot pack-in, so why not have something similar to VR Worlds for the PSVR 2? Farpoint is a VR shooter that was built around the aim controller, a plastic peripheral that makes you feel like you're holding a gun rather than two controllers in midair. It got excellent reviews and is said to be a good quality VR game with high production values and an excellent story that has nice graphics. Even without the aim controller, I still feel like this could work. We've got plenty of VR games that are two-handed weapons using the normal motion controls, and even though the game's probably a bit basic in gameplay, we're still lacking really good story-driven VR shooters with nice graphics, so it would make a good addition to the PSVR 2 library. The studio went on to make Larcenauts, a hero shooter that didn't sell well unfortunately. It's unclear if the developers are still working on VR games at the moment, as the social media channels have been dead for a while, but resurrecting Farpoint and bringing it to PSVR 2 could be a good way to get some new sales for an older game without having to make something from scratch. Golem was a PSVR1 game that released later on in its life cycle. You controlled a large rock-like creature and using a sword had to take on battles against other golems or smaller creatures. The movement looked slow and it was very mixed after it released, with some people loving it and others hating it. Obviously, like all these games, I haven't played it, but I still think maybe with some updates it could be a good game to add to the PSVR 2 library. Another game that had mixed reception was The Inpatient. This is made by the same developers of Rush of Blood and it's based in the Until Dawn universe and was a psychological horror with some trippy moments where you're in an asylum talking to NPCs and occasionally breaking out of your room being chased by some sort of monster. Visually, it looks great. Maybe this is one that should stay locked to the PSVR 1, but I'd still like to try it for myself one day. Statik is a unique puzzle game which made great use of the tracked PS4 controller. Using the gamepad, you had to press buttons and move the thumbsticks to free your hands from a puzzle box. It's a very simple concept that I could imagine working very well in VR. This is one that probably won't work without that tracked controller, because the entire point was your hands being bound together inside this box. This was made by Tarsier Studios, who also made Little Nightmares, one of my favourite games. I've heard that Statik has a dark twist to the story that gets revealed as you play, which is probably what intrigues me the most. Monsters of the Deep is an official Final Fantasy VR fishing game. We've got a bunch of fishing games in VR, but the twist with this one is that you're catching big fish that end up turning into more of a boss battle and you have to use different weapons to defeat them. I think having a fishing game where you have more aggressive sea creatures to fight could make a genre that I'm not personally that interested in actually interesting for me to personally play, and it would open up lots of possibilities for gameplay other than you just using a fishing rod with some different types of bait. The last game that I'm going to mention is Tumble. This is a basic one. You have blocks that you have to stack onto different shapes, and it gets progressively harder. This seems like a more chill seated game, which I don't feel that we have a lot of personally. Overall, I think that PSVR1 has some great VR games that are locked to an old platform, and updating some of these games and bringing them to PSVR 2 could help give the new system a big boost. I haven't bought a PSVR 2 yet because there aren't enough games for me to justify the cost of a PS5 and a headset. If some of these exclusives got ports, I think that it might push me over the edge and would make the PSVR 2 much more attractive to new buyers. I guess at some point, if they don't get ports, I'm going to have to try and pick up a cheap PS4 and PSVR 1 so that I can play these games that I missed out on, but hopefully it won't come to that. Let me know if there are any PSVR 1 games you think I missed that really deserve a PSVR 2 port, and as always, a huge thanks to my Patreon and YouTube members for supporting me.